Conditions continue to worsen in the US, and this is having an effect on the global economy. So today we will discuss how the jobs are gone, and so is America. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. I want to get into the job situation today primarily, but I do want to touch on a few other points. Let's look at this first, the S&P 500 versus liquidity. And you can see that the S&P 500 has been on a rise for the most part. And then you look at the liquidity, which is having some serious issues, since here they're showing during the financial crisis just afterwards, obviously being a big problem. Now, when you look at liquidity, for those who don't know, becomes a big problem for the future, or I should say the near future, for the stock market, because you need that liquidity there in order for the stock market to continue to increase. They're always in need of new buyers for the shares, and that's why we have the companies buying up their own shares, because real investors are not buying at the rate that the government suggests or the mainstream media suggests. So let's move on to this. This is just one of many indicators. Wages of production and non-supervisory employees year-over-year change, and since the financial crisis has been declining significantly. Look at this, practically in a straight line downward. Yes, there was some growth there for a little bit, but that's all temporary work. And then you look at how bad it has really become over these past few years. It is consistently seeing these indicators popping up everywhere, and this is just one of many. So I'll move on to the big news. US added 126,000 jobs. Wow, that's great. But they were expecting 245,000. The jobless rate stays at 5.5%. Now, these job numbers are all fictional and all phony, but this is a big jump here. That is 126 to 245. They were way off, and this is with all of this fake temporary worker strategy that they have and all of these other games that they're playing, and still they couldn't even meet that. But they somehow still remained at an unemployment rate of 5.5%, when we know, and I will show you in a moment, how this is all such a big joke. This is right here, Americans not in the labor force exceeding now 93 million. I've been covering these statistics here, obviously watching them very closely, and this is getting worse. We can see that. We can see the charts. We can see these numbers consistently, but of course, not being talked about. 62.7% of the labor force participation matches a 37-year low. If you go in this article, I believe further down, you can see the chart, but you can check it out on your own time here. The number of the Americans 16 years or older who did not participate in the labor force, meaning they neither had a job nor actively sought one in the last 4 weeks, rose from just under 92 million to now over 93 million people. That's a massive amount of people not in the labor force. And of course, this really shows you the strength of the economy, or I should say, lack thereof. This is out of CNS News, but the BLS is the one providing these statistics. I want to go on to this first. U.S. growth forecast chopped to 0. That's right. We're going into now the basically negative territory, but just for a moment here, U.S. gross domestic product, or the GDP, growth dropped to 0 on April 1st and then ticked back up to 0.1% on April 2nd. And this is the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. In a moment here, I'm going to show you their chart from their website. But essentially, they have their own way of calculating the GDP. This is the chart right here, and you can see that it is essentially at 0% now. They are really fudging these numbers to get this to stay positive, and of course it should be negative. It should have been negative a long time ago, but this is what we have to deal with. We have to see these things all of the time and how fake they really are. It's quite funny for you and I'm sure, but the general population is unfortunately swindled by this. So right there, this is out of the FRB Atlanta Federal Reserve Board. Look at my book when I talked about the U3 versus the U6. This is the BLS Statistics showing you that we have the U3, which is the set of numbers provided by the government. This is the quote unemployment rate. This is a number that has been declining, and this is obviously it's a little outdated, this chart, but the numbers are relatively the same. And then you look at the U6, another government provided number, but it includes the underemployed. So those who simply are getting part-time work when they should get full-time, and other factors here. So this is showing you a huge jump, and it is actually government provided statistics. So just using even those numbers, you get such a different picture. But of course, they want to show you the U3 number, which really does not, absolutely does not get into the details. Then we have Japan, which is a huge issue, and they fudge the numbers right here, and you can see this Japan basic wage old and revised. So they came out and had to admit the fact that these numbers weren't real, and they revised them, and you could see for this long period of time, in fact, there was no growth whatsoever. And of course, they did this to bring it into the positive territory, but it remains to be seen what exactly will come of this. It's just simply more of the same. They're pumping up their own stock market, and they're even doing this for their jobs numbers. They're having zombie banks. They nationalize the banks just to keep them alive, and instead of letting them fail, we have this type of activity that is taking place. Now, that's it for that topic. What I wanted to get into was just a few extra things today, and this is one very important thing, I believe. A small German lender has filed a lawsuit against the ECB in a bid to avoid coming under its supervision, marking the first legal challenge to the ECB's new monitoring role. This is out of the Wall Street Journal, and they said this: in November, the ECB took over direct supervision of Europe's 120 largest banks, assuming that responsibility from national supervisors. So this could be good. Obviously, you want to have a body looking after these details, but ultimately, these banks, particularly the smaller ones who don't get to work with the central banks and don't have them in their pockets, essentially looking at this, and we need to realize that there's much more going on here. It isn't all one-sided, bankers versus the people. There are small companies that can't afford this type of activity that is taking place, and they don't want this. They want to be able to conduct their business the way they see fit. There's so much more going on here, but the reason I mention this is that there is a possibility to fight back against the system. There are all kinds of different activities that are taking place today. This is just one. We know of many lawsuits that take place. Most of the time, unfortunately, it doesn't go anywhere, but it doesn't really give us any reason to lose hope. This is huge news from Cyprus. We all know about the bail-ins that took place. Cyprus will lift next week the last of the capital controls that were imposed 2 years ago as part of a 10 billion euro European bailout. What I wanted to note about this was at the bottom, Cyprus is emerging from the crisis that forced it to seek a bailout and impose a levy, remember that word a second, on depositors 2 years ago, while Greece, which in 2010 became the first country to be rescued by its euro area partners. The reason I'm mentioning this is because of the levy. Now, they use this word levy here. They also used it, if you watch my video I did about bail-ins. If not, it's on the main channel page under my e-course, and they use the word levy. Now, the UK also used this word to describe, or I believe it could have been Germany. It's in that video regardless, and they describe a one-off tax, a levy, which would allow them to recapitalize the banking system. And this is what we have to fear, because they're starting to roll this out. When I've talked about the bail-ins, they said, no, this is not what we're talking about at all. But is it a levy? Because if it's a levy, then that's what the other bank, central bank, was talking about. So either way, they're coming after the bank's actual accounts. They're going to recapitalize themselves by doing this. Why? Well, because there's a long chain of events that are occurring here. As I've been discussing throughout the video, obviously the governments are in big trouble right now. The banking institutions have been gambling and they need more money. Let's move on to the last thing right here, which is a very serious topic out of the RT. One day after the California governor, Jerry Brown, issues the state's first ever mandatory water restrictions, environmental activists are calling for an official limit of the use of water by oil companies. Very big news. Essentially, he signed an executive order saying that you have to cut your water usage by 25% over the next 9 months, and that will save millions of gallons of water. And right here, they're saying, look, the oil industry is using millions of gallons every single day. And this is not fair to the individual people when the oil industry gets to use as much as they want. And then further down in the article, they are talking about fracking and how fracking uses an extremely large amount of water. And the people in California are not happy about this because they do not want to have to restrict their water while the corporations are allowed to make as much as they want, take as much as they want. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is obvious. They need to conserve water. They're in a very big issue here. They have the jobs problem. See, I can see the dilemma that they're in, because obviously this industry, whether, whichever side you're on here, this industry brings jobs to the people in the US. So by really shutting down this part, it would be a big detriment to these workers here. So I could see both sides of the equation. However, there is going to be a shortage, a very serious shortage in the water supply. It's going to continue. It's going to be much worse. So we're going to have a big issue ahead for California, for the drought, and I believe for the jobs that are all affected down the line for this. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe on this YouTube channel. There are well over 18,000 people on here, so I hope that you will be one if you're not already. And of course, don't forget to become an insider. It's where I give out all my best intel for free. That is available at themoneygps.com. All you got to do is scroll down to the bottom and fill in your email address, and you get an occasional email from me with good, short, concise info.